Hi, I'm Sarah Butcher, and this is the Oxford Side Comment. In 2000, academics Michael O. Emerson and Christian Smith wrote Divided by Faith, the groundbreaking examination of evangelical Christianity's troubled navigations of race in America. Drawing on the data in nationwide telephone survey of 2,000 people and then an additional 200 face-to-face interviews, it provided a portrait of white evangelical America that no one had fully understood before. In the quarter century since its publication, America has changed. Michael Emerson joins us today to talk about how he and Christian Smith looked at the current landscape and the 5 changes that they decided the book needed in order to continue this important conversation.
Hello, this is Michael Emerson. I am co-author of Divided by Faith, the second edition, as well as the first edition. The first edition came out a quarter of a century ago, and it had more impact, I think, than we as the authors anticipated, selling many, many thousands of copies and being something that was discussed across much of Christianity. So with a quarter of a century coming by, it seemed like the right time to update the volume. Much has changed, and I wanted to just briefly summarize 5 major points that have changed or have been updated in this new edition. So first of all, I'll start with maybe the smallest of them, and that is language updates. We used to say, for example, blacks and whites. Well, we now say black people and white people, or black Americans and white Americans. The volume then has been thoroughly updated to reflect these changing sensibilities. Second, we've incorporated 25 years of new research to update multiple chapters and to write a brand new chapter. There's been a great deal of research done on race and religion since Divided by Faith, the original volume, came out. And so we wanted to incorporate all of that information and new knowledge. Third, the data for the book, the original publication, were largely drawn from the 1990s. And you can imagine a 20-year-old reading about that. That's ancient history. So the new version uses data updated all the way through the 2020s. And it also then, in doing that, allows us to examine what, if anything, has changed over this 30-year period. So we found and incorporate census data and all kinds of other information, survey data that's been done continually over the last 30 years. Fourth, we assess, in light of these past few decades of research, whether the original thesis of the book, which is that white evangelicals use their subcultural religious tools to understand race, applied in light of their racial isolation, whether that thesis still holds a quarter of a century later. The short answer, it does indeed. And it seems to be even more applicable today based on the data and the research. And then finally, and I think perhaps maybe most importantly, we examined the rise of what we could call the mega or MAGA evangelicals and the rise of the Christian nationalist movement. This is something that wasn't much talked about or even thought about in the year 2000. We certainly talk about it a lot in 2025. So, for example, at the time of Divided by Faith, the original publication, and the few decades before that, about 2/3 of white evangelicals would vote for the Republican candidate for president, whoever the candidate was. But something shifted in 2004 election and hasn't stopped, and that is that the percentage voting for the Republican candidate among white evangelicals has increased significantly. Trump, for example, in the last 3 elections has received over 80% of the white evangelical vote. This increasing intertwining of white evangelicalism and politics, it's both fascinating and it's impacting the nation in profound ways. So in this new chapter, we assess this movement and explore why it has occurred and what it could mean going forward.